lights in the sky. I ain't sure what it is, but it's making me fly. Spaceships zooming past, colors flashing by. I'm lost in the rhythm, feeling oh so high. UFOs and me, we're floating in the night, feeling airy free. Everything's just right. Alien friends wave, grooving side by side. In the cosmic dance, we just let it ride. Riding through the shadows, under the moon's gleam. Lost in the reggae beat, like a perfect dream.
Oh yeah!
UFOs and me, we're floating in the night, feeling airy free. Everything's just right. Alien friends wave, grooving side by side. In the cosmic dance, we just let it ride. Riding through the shadows, under the moon's gleam. Lost in the reggae beat, like a perfect dream.
Good morning. What a day. Alright, there we go. Turn that off. How you like that music in the morning? That was pretty good. The AI comic book fan. Good morning, comic book fan. Or afternoon for you, I think. How are you? Comic book fan. Man, what a great streamer you are, bro. I haven't seen you in so long because I've been fucking off the map. But, what up, yo? Good to see you. Absolutely, man. Good to see you. All right, we're going to jump into that AI music that we played. Was called, the first one was Gregorian chant, was the type of music. And the AI prompt for it was called Jesus Was an Alien. Even though he wasn't. He was a normal human. He was an alien. So that one was good. And then the second one was me getting high with UFOs was the prompt, and the type of music was a reggae beat. So that was your UFOs and me, the AI called it. So that was pretty good. And today is episode 57 of the podcast, and we're talking about the time frame. You know, I touched on this a little bit last week. What happened was, I keep mentioning how our perception of time is relevant to how we perceive the universe and to how we perceive religion, God, extraterrestrials, even everything. You know, for example, today, ancient alien theorists and other people are saying these gods, Zeus, Odin, Kukulkan, Yahweh, Amaterasu, were all the same extraterrestrial gods, just known by different names in different cultures. And some of them were more revered or less revered than others, depending on which culture you went to. But the point is they were all there. Back then, we called them gods. They had a different lifespan than us. They appeared to be immortal. They had these crazy weapons. They could overcome diseases. We can do that today. With modern medicine, we can overcome diseases. With modern technology, we have crazy advanced weapons, and with modern medicine, we're living longer than we ever would. Back in ancient Rome, the average lifespan for a regular person was 25 years old. I mean, today we look back and we see, oh, these people got married at 12, 13 years old. But yeah, you got married at 12, 13 years old because you were only going to live another 10 more years. So, like, why not? You know, and basically, you know, unless you lived pretty good, everybody's parents died by the time you were 12, 13 years old, if they started having kids at like 12, 13 years old. You know, like, so if you were to meet a being like today who lived for 75, 80 years, it would appear that we're more immortal than you are. But in reality, it's just modern medicine. It's the same thing. If I were to, for example, take in Norse myth, in Celtic mythology, there's the god Lu, who's the same as the god Odin, and he has a spear, and the spear can be thrown and always hits its target, and if he whistles, it can move to another target. So what are you talking about here? You're talking about something that's operated by some sort of voice command. We have these things today. Look at Alexa. You know, look at Siri. Look at Gemini. Look at Grok. You know, all these things you could talk to, and they talk to you, and they make a command. I could tell my Alexa to turn the lights on. I could tell her to turn them off. And it's the same thing. I give a voice command, and something happens. There's a result of it. It's just a different input method. It's the same type of thing. So, you know, but we're talking about all these beings as being immortal and all of this, and we say, oh, the ancient people. I even just mentioned ancient Rome, which was 2,000 plus years ago. So, but what are we talking about here? Last week on the podcast, I brought up the point that when a human being, an average person, you ask today, you know, if I go to you, let's say I talk to comic book fan, right? And I ask him, I say, when you think ancient, give me a number of years. Well, this has actually been a study before, multiple studies. And most people think ancient is about 500 to 1,300 years. On average, you know, in the scope. But if you read the ancient texts, what they're talking about is 12,000 plus years ago. The whole story of the flood in the Bible, Noah, is at least a story that's 13,000 years old. And we know this to be a case today in modern archaeology and modern climatology and geology, because we know for a fact that there was a real great flood about 12,000 BC, between, you know, 12 and 14,000 years ago. The polar ice caps began to melt. And they started melting a little bit over time. And then, for some reason, there was a rapid melting process. We know this. We could tell this through geological records. We could also tell this through, dendrochronology? Is that where you measure the tree rings? I'm forgetting the name of it. But we could tell this by measuring the tree rings also. In fact, fun fact, we could tell by measuring the tree rings that the stories of the sun being blacked out in 1503 AD are true. What's many scientists are able to determine, it's not a 100% proven fact yet, but it seems to be the most likely result as of what's been going on, is that in around 1502, 01-ish, there was like a volcano that went off somewhere near Europe and literally caused a massive explosion that caused what we now term is a nuclear winter. A nuclear winter doesn't have to be done by a nuclear bomb. It could also be done by volcanoes and other massive explosions, but it affects the climate is what it is. So the nuclear winter gives off by the volcano, and the ashes spread around the world and created a thin layer in the atmosphere that blocked out a large amount of the sun's radiation and energy that we need for photosynthesis, and plants need for photosynthesis. So you, taking all of this into effect, you realize that that when the volcano blew and went around the world, it created this area that's able to grow. It created less energy for the plants to be able to go. Excuse me, I stumbled over my words there for a second. And we could tell this by the tree rings in that year and the subsequent years, because they're not as thick as they were in years prior and years after. So that's an interesting way of dating time, but we're able to tell that the stories of the sun being blocked out in 1503 seem to actually be true. In fact, some scientists say some historians, say that this might have been the worst year to be alive in modern record. Meaning that, like, we had records at that time, so, in recorded history. Basically, 500 AD to now is basically what the historians term recorded history, quote unquote. But because it's not really recorded history, we have no idea what happened in 500 AD or 700 AD. There's many historical accounts in Europe, in England, about all the different warriors and the people, and we don't even know if those stories are true to this day. So I don't know. I'm going to take a sip of this coffee because I don't want it to get cold. The coffee's good. If you're chilling this morning and you got your coffee too, hit that brunch mug emote in there. Everybody has some coffee. I'm choking. It's good coffee today, though. But most people think in time frames of ancient as 500 to 1300 years ago. Well, 1300 years ago is 700 AD-ish. So, and we have no idea what happened in those times. We have certain historical accounts, certain things going on that we know about, but all of it's really just conjecture. It's all just interpretation. We know some things for a fact, but we have to do archaeology, and even archaeologists, when you look at something that's that old, they say this is ancient, this is medieval, this is old. But what's older than that? That's what I'm getting at is the point. What's older than that? For example, we talk about the ancient gods and the extraterrestrial gods, and we say they were here in ancient times. But what years do I mean? Am I talking about 1,000, 5,000 years ago, like in ancient Sumeria, for example? Or 5,000-ish years ago when Abraham left Sumer and the city of Ur at the behest of God, Yahweh? Am I talking about then? Because we know that Sumer was a real place that encompassed modern-day Iraq, Afghanistan, all of those areas. And eventually this country of Sumer split into the areas of Babylon and Akkad, which became the Akkadians, which are written about extensively in the Bible. So we're talking about those periods. So right away, we're able to tell by archaeology and biblical dating that those stories in the Bible do have merit, because we know that Sumer existed. We know that the city of existed. So therefore, it's plausible that Abraham left. In fact, many historians think that Abraham was probably one of the local, major landowners or something, a minor noble, what you could possibly call it. He was a leader of the people in his little area. And those people eventually became the modern day, the Israelites, and then eventually modern day Jews and Israelis and stuff like that. But those people came from one little area and one little village and spread out everywhere. And this is a historical account that we know about because we could tell the story of the beliefs of the people about it. We can read that in the Bible. Meanwhile, we know that it was written a few hundred, if not a few thousand years later, but most of it seems to be pretty true based on archaeological records. In fact, we can probably assume that these cultures as well as did the same thing as many, many other cultures, where they passed down their histories orally, very rigidly through the priestly class for centuries until finally somebody began to write it down. And we know this to be the case in many Jewish historical accounts because they have different books of the Hebrew Bible. They have different books. The Torah has a chronology of when it was written. They have all different. They have another later on. They have the Kabbalistic teachings. They have all these different interpretations of the religion, but many of them have a common area, so we could use that along with archaeology and geology to figure out the truth, or as much of the truth as we can, behind the situations. So what are we talking about? When were the gods here? 5,000 years ago, like we just spoke about in the city of Sumer? Well, maybe, but it's more likely that the remnants of them were here, or a new version of new extraterrestrials were here. In fact, this might be the case because in many times we hear the term old gods and new gods. So that could be one representation of the previous extraterrestrials who were here and then these new race of extraterrestrials who were here. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We know that it's not 5,000 years ago that we're talking about, because through geological dating, and atmospheric, dating through ice layers and all stuff like that, we're able to tell that the flood happened somewhere around 10 to, more likely like 10 to 12,000 BC, which was about 12 to 14,000 years ago. So right away we know that we're talking 12 to 14 plus thousand years ago. Because we know that Noah in the Bible was before the flood. We know that the flood existed. And we know that the gods were here before the flood. In fact, in all religious accounts, whether it's put in terms of God or the gods, they were all here. Something happened. They decided to send the flood, start the experiment over, and this time they were not going to have a direct hand in it. Every culture says the same thing. They weren't going to have a direct hand in the affairs of humanity anymore. So right away, we could take that to meaning that pre-14,000 years ago is when the gods were here. But when did they first get here? Well, some people believe that some of the accounts state that the gods first arrived here. In fact, Sumerian accounts, cuneiform tablets, in fact, even Zechariah Sitchin believed that the gods first came here, the very first time, 270 million years ago. Fun fact, the dinosaurs were still here up until about 65 million years ago. So 270 million minus 65 million is how many years that they were here with dinosaurs. Who else was here? What else was here? Were there other creatures? What was going on with the dinosaurs? Were there other types of beings living here? We have no friggin' idea. But all we know is that something was happening in those times. What's interesting is, if you look, there's a lot of petroglyphs and other types of art in the ancient times, cave art, that depict human beings living alongside dinosaurs, riding on top of dinosaurs, doing all these types of things. In fact, there's even an actual fossilized footprint of a human being and a dinosaur right next to each other. So, what the hell is going on? Because we thought that they left 65 million years ago. Well, we know that that's not the case, because modern day chickens are direct descendants of the T-Rex. So every time you eat the egg of a chicken, you're eating a baby dinosaur. Literally. Like, you know, if A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. You know, if dinosaur equals chicken, chicken equals breakfast, dinosaur equals breakfast. You know, like, it's very, very straightforward. So we know that they didn't leave. In fact, some historians believe that maybe the possibility is that dragons actually did exist thousands of years ago. We're talking about pre-7,000 years ago. But that they were just, you know, the leftover remnants of the dinosaurs. That the dragons that you would see were probably the pterodactyl type dinosaurs, the ones that could fly and escape, you know, the immediate devastation faster than those on land. We know that this is true because we found evidence of the coelacanth. The coelacanth actually predates the dinosaurs that lived on the earth, the ones that we think of in our brain, the T-Rex, the pterodactyls, all of that. The coelacanth is older than those guys. They're from like the pre-Jurassic period. I forget what the actual name is called off the top of my head. So these dinosaurs literally lived for millions more years after we thought that they didn't. Why? Well, it seems to be obvious. They were able to survive through various means, living in the ocean, flying away through the air, You know, the same thing. They couldn't escape it forever because it eventually spread across the whole planet, but they could at least, escape it in times where they could move forward enough to get some food so that they could live on while the guys behind them weren't able to get food in time, So, at that point, it's basically natural selection takes over. So, we are talking about the good coffee. It's almost getting cold already. It's fucked up. So, what I think is important is to understand that what we really need to talk about is, when did our belief in these beings as divine, intervening gods come into play? What we seem to be talking about is about 50,000 years ago. We know through various historical accounts that about 50,000 years ago, one of our genes, two of our genes actually, combined genetically and became one single gene. We also know that about 50,000 years ago, our frontal cortex changed a little bit. So we know a few things happened to the human body, to the human brain, to the way we think and perceive the world, or more importantly, the way we interact with each other. If you read in a lot of these ancient texts, they all say that language was given to us by the gods. Modern day historians believe that language came into being in our culture about 50,000 years ago. 50,000 years ago, about the same time that those two genes combined into one. Francis Crick thought that this was an artificial mutation, that he thought that absolutely in no possible way could this have been done naturally. So what does that mean? Well, that means that either the gods are real, God is real, whatever, came down and said, I want to make human beings better, or extraterrestrials came in and messed with our genes and gave us language so that we can communicate and become more advanced with each other. Because before then, all we could do is give each other feelings and signs and whatever. There were some ways of communicating, but it wasn't like fully formed language like we have today. And we know this to be the case, through modern day historical records. However, it's not 100% clear that it is the case, because we're starting to find different cave paintings and different things that were done by our hominid ancestors, the Neanderthals, which suggests that they had the ability, just like us, for abstract thought and recording of events, chronology, timelines, frame of references. So they weren't imbeciles. They had some sort of knowledge of something going on. And what's interesting is that some of these depict angelic beings coming down. Well, if the Neanderthals died out about 50,000-ish years ago, 40,000 years ago, and they saw the same angelic beings that our ancestors saw all those thousands of years ago, well, isn't that proof right there that somebody really did come and visit? I'll take into account that in our own modern day history of space flight and space travel, Russian cosmonauts have reported multiple accounts that they witnessed these 12-foot tall, sometimes even 20-foot tall, angelic ethereal beings in hominid shapes, 2 eyes, a mouth, 2 arms, 2 legs, with giant wings, glowing, like as if they're like some ethereal beings. What's interesting is that American scientists, American astronauts don't report this, but we'll roll with it anyway, because it takes account into the same fact as that when the original watchers came here, the original gods who came here 50,000 years ago were 12 to 20 foot tall, giant winged humanoid beings. So is that the account of the same thing? What's interesting is this all may be just technology. They could come from a gigantic planet that makes them able to grow 10, 20 feet tall with less gravity, or a small planet with very micro amount of gravity, something, whatever the case may be. And they could grow this big. Then you have to wonder, okay, well, where do the wings come from? Where does the glowing sense come from? Well, maybe they have some sort of advanced technology. Maybe they really are 270 million years old. Maybe they're a billion years old as a society, right? Let's just say that they are. What kind of technology would you have? Maybe you're like Green Lantern in the DC Comics. Maybe you just put on some thing and it allows you to, it surrounds your body with this impenetrable life support system, whatever, and then you want to fly, so it grows some giant wings on your back. And you fly through space, and you're fucking 20 feet tall, and you have crazy technology. You're literally glowing in light with an orb around you. Maybe you don't need a spaceship because you could just zoop, gone. And you're literally, who knows? Who knows? Maybe we'll have that technology a billion years from now. Who knows? Maybe that's what we're all going to. Maybe we all want to become just like Green Lantern. Maybe that's where the idea of Green Lantern came from, was because we have that memory of those glowing angelic beings that came down here, and it's somewhere ingrained in our society. And it is ingrained in our society because people who report seeing angelic beings today say the same thing. They're giant beings floating up in the air with wings, and they look like a person, 2 arms, 2 legs, a nose and a mouth, but somehow they're different. They're glowing, they're radiant, blah, blah, blah. It could all just be technology. It doesn't have to be magic. It doesn't have to be something else. It could just be technology we don't understand. Some people have theorized that maybe they're like 5th or 6th dimensional beings that are able to come here, and the reason why you perceive them as floating above you is because they're literally higher up in a dimension, so their plane of existence doesn't exactly align with our plane of existence. It could be something like that. Who knows? We have no idea. Our science is only a few hundred years old. It's nothing. We know squadool about the universe. We don't know shit. There could be millions and billions of things out there. There are billions of stars in our own there are hundreds of billions of stars in our galaxy alone, and there are hundreds of billions of galaxies. So how many civilizations are that? That could be hundreds of thousands of civilizations. It could be 1 billion civilizations out there, and each of them with 5-10 billion people. I mean, that's massive amount. Think about how many different types of beings that would be in the universe. Thousands, millions, or literally billions. And I'm getting ahead of myself again. I'm enjoying this conversation. It could literally be billions of beings out there. And we have no idea what the universe is capable of. We have no idea what these beings are capable of. It's the same thing. Michio Kaku is famous for saying about one of his ideas on ancient aliens. This is why he's an ancient alien theorist. He says, he talks to his colleagues about extraterrestrials coming in and stuff, and then he says, and they roll their eyes at him and they say, space flight is too far and the distances between space are too much. And okay, I agree with that. We all agree with that. But that assumes that they're only 10, 20, 100, 200 years more advanced than us. What if they're 1,000 years more advanced than us? What if they're 1 million years more advanced than us? Well, I say, what if they're 1 billion years more advanced than us? What kind of technology would you have after 1 billion years? You would have a massive amount of technology. So, you would literally have accessible, you would figure out so much about physics, about the universe, about the world. There would be so much you would know that our basic theories of relativity would be a moot point. It would be nothing. It wouldn't mean anything because that's 1 billion years outdated. So now we're talking about these beings being here 50,000 plus years ago. Let's hear from the Pressure Boys while I have some coffee.
Hey yo, this is Cece from Pressure Boys, the best smoke on the East Coast, and you're watching the WARRmultiverse. Sheesh!
Sheesh! Hold on. Gotta finish that coffee before it goes bad. All right, so we're talking about 50,000 plus years ago. If we read the ancient texts, 50,000 plus years ago, these beings, let's take for example, Zechariah Sitchin's interpretation of the Sumerian cuneiform tablets. There's all the stories about the gods and their conversations, their interactions on the earth, all this stuff. For example, if you read it, they were here and they literally worked and toiled the land and mined the natural minerals on this planet for a few thousand years, about 10,000 Earth years, which for the gods is it's 3.5, 4 years for the extraterrestrials, if they're from the Anunnaki planet, like Zechariah Sitchin says. So it's about 3.5 of their years. About 10,000 years on Earth. They says, we've been mining these Earth for 10,000 years. We can't do it anymore. We can't do it anymore. Well, these beings say, we're slaving away over here. We can't take it. We need, like, some sort of machines or people to do it for us. We need like a slave species or machines or some robots or something or whatever. And then there's the story that the god Enki says, hold on. I was down over there exploring the earth and this land, and I came upon this species on the planet, and they seem to be more intelligent than the other species on the planet. Hold the fucking phone. It says right there, other species on the planet. What are you talking about here? Zachariah Sitchin just interpreted them as being the Anunnaki. I interpret them as being the other hominids on the planet. Right there, you could take this storyline of 50,000 years ago, throw it out the window. Now we have to push the date back. This story didn't take place 50,000 years ago with the frontal cortex and all of that. The story took place longer ago than that. How much longer ago than that? Probably about 250,000 years ago. Why? Because we know that 250,000 years ago, the first hominid species of Homo sapiens arose. So we have our two different dates right there. 250,000 years ago, first Homo sapiens arose. 50,000 years ago, our genes, the one gene or two genes were combined into one gene. So there was about 200,000 years where human beings roamed the earth with other hominids. And if you want to go back into this, we did a whole entire podcast episode on the dating of all the different hominids that existed during this times and longer ago than that. I would appreciate it if you went back to that. I'm not going to go through every single hominid that existed again. In fact, we didn't even go through every single one that existed again. I think we only touched on like 5 or 6. And in the 2-hour episode, there's just too many to go about. In fact, the reason why we might have different racist ideas and different ideas of otherness is because of our shared historical experience of literally other types of species of hominid that existed on this planet. So literally at one point there were different races on the planet of hominid. There were the Denisovans and the Neanderthals, and all of us existed all at once for about 200,000 years. Now, there were some before the 200,000 year mark, some that literally only existed during that time like we did. But what you can assume is that we either went out and either conquered those people or interbred with those people. The answer is we probably did both. We probably interbred with them and conquered them. Probably both. The ones who interbred eventually had children who were able to unite both areas, and then they all interbred, and then they became one species, and over time, they all interbred together or died out or whatever, and became the modern day Homo sapiens that we are today. However, we then know that there were 50,000 years ago when our genes were mixed together. Literally, as Francis Crick thought it to be, in a laboratory. The problem is this throws in our whole time frame into account. But not if you look at it as the 270 million year time frame. If you look at it as that, it starts to make a little sense now. Because we see that over time there were, some sort of thing going on here. In fact, if you read the ancient texts, it doesn't say that the gods came here and started, living here, mining the land, doing all this right away. They came here and just checked it out. Almost like our astronauts are doing today. Almost like imagine our first space flight to Mars. Today we talk about with Elon Musk and other scientists, and even in the 60s and 70s, other scientists talk about going there, and the first thing we do is set up a base. But in reality, it's probably going to be more like the moon. You're going to go there, chill for a little bit, check some shit out, look around, and then you got to go back. There's no base there. There's no nothing there. There's no livable food, nothing. You can't stay there. It's like going hiking in the mountain and only surviving on the food you bring. Once your food runs out, you got to get out because you got to go home and get more food. Might be the same type of thing. They saw the planet, a couple of guys get in the spaceship, launch out, land here. They're like, oh, that's pretty good. Oh, looks great. Looks great, bro. This is a nice place to be. We'll come back here. And then they leave. And then a few decades later in their terms, a few 10,000 years for 10,000, 20,000 years for our terms, or more, they come here and they say, we got some problems going on, and hey, remember this planet over there? Let's go over there and check it out. And this time we'll put in a massive effort. We'll build a base. We'll build a landing place for our spaceships. We'll do all these types of things. And we'll check it out. We'll stay there this time. And that's what the texts say they did. So they go there, they come in, and then they start doing all these things. They start checking out the geology. They start checking out the animals and the plants that live here and are natural to the area. Remember, we're talking about 200 and something million years ago. Dinosaurs were still here. Trees were hundreds of times bigger than they are now. I mean, everything is massive. Imagine coming into a world like that. What would you see? Imagine that. Dinosaurs are massive. Go outside after the show is done, or if you're listening later on, pause it. Go outside, stand at the bottom of a tree, and look up, straight up to the top of the tree. Now imagine that tree being 100 times thicker and 100 times taller. That's what it was like during when the T-Rex were alive, over 65 million years ago. Massive. The world was massive back then. Everything was totally different. Imagine coming to a planet like that. That's fucking awesome, bro. That is crazy to think about. That would be amazing, bro. Like, that's got to be so cool to see. So they would see all of this, and they would go, oh, this world is massive. There are these giant creatures. And remember, these beings we're talking about are 8 to 10 feet tall, maybe even taller. So you're literally talking about giant humans looking up at even gianter world. It's crazy to think about that. And they say it's giant. So the world is just massive. Then they're here for all this time, doing all this stuff, and after a few thousand Earth years, they realize that they don't want to do this anymore, bro. They're going to do a whole bunch of things. So now we're talking about, plus 250,000 years ago. Plus 250,000 years ago, the gods say, hey, if you read the ancient texts, they would build these landing places and mining operations in these remote areas. And then they would fly across at the speed of, the blink of an eye and hide themselves from the various beings who lived on the planet. It all says this right there. And they would hide themselves from the beings who lived on the planet. They would study them from afar. Think about how go watch a nature documentary, right? The best nature documentaries are when you're right there in the thick of it and the lions don't pay any attention to you at all. They don't even know you're there, or if they do, you're so insignificant you're like a fly. Those are the best nature documentaries. You see the craziest shit that animals are capable of. And yet, why is it so far-fetched to think that these way more, hundreds of thousands of years more advanced culture than us wouldn't do the same? They'd come to in fact, we would literally do the same freaking thing, bro. If we get in a spaceship that's able to fly over to Sirius B and study the planet that's around there that's supposedly similar to Earth, and where some of the aliens say that they come from, where some of the things say that the aliens come from. Let's just take, for example, that. And we go there, and we realize that there are natural beings there, but they're tribal people. They live in tents and little huts, They do all these different things where they're very different than us. They speak a different language. They live a different life. They eat different plants. They eat different animals. They don't eat different plants and different animals, depending on it. They live an entirely different culture with different beliefs, but they're not advanced. They don't have technology. The first thing we would do is we would land in some area that we determined to be remote, and then we would go out and explore and watch these beings from afar. We would see them, and we would know what types of plants to eat, what types of animals to eat, what's dangerous. We would see the languages they're speaking, and we would get to understand and know their language and what they term things are before we even talk to them. That's exactly what's described in many of these texts. They came here, they did their business, kept themselves separate from us, and would watch us from afar for thousands of years. And to them, the thousands of years was like a couple decades. They would just sit there and watch us, set up cameras and do all these things and have exploratory expeditions. And then there are stories of some of those beings meeting them. But the point is those beings are not Homo sapiens. They're not human beings. They're other hominids that existed before we did 250,000 years ago. That's who they're talking to. That's who they're talking about. These other beings that they looked at, they're talking about the other hominids that existed on this planet before we did. That's what they're talking about. So these texts are right away talking about that they've been here for hundreds of thousands of years, actively on this planet. Then they said, they had this whatever going on, and they said, we need to create the beings. Well, maybe they were talking about robots, maybe they weren't. But in the Sumerian text, there's the god Enki, who is the son of the supreme god, the firstborn, although not the heir to the throne, because he's the firstborn of a man and a woman not related. In ancient Sumerian historical accounts and in the Anunnaki culture, in order to be the heir to something, you had to be the child of your father and your father's half-sister. Weirdly enough, I don't know why, but that was the rule. And it's funny because that is actually one of the reasons why we know that Abraham came from Sumer. Because if you read the Bible, Abraham and his wife Sarah was actually Abraham's half-sister. This is why there's the split between Islam and Judaism. Because Isaac, the son of Abraham who becomes his heir, is not the firstborn. Isaac is the second-born son. However, Ishmael is born of, what was her name? Huda something? Was born of the other woman who's not genetically related to him. He was the firstborn son, Ishmael. Then you have later on Isaac being born, but because Isaac is born of Abraham's half-sister, by law, he is the heir to the throne. He is the heir to Abraham's property, to Abraham's thing, and to God's faithful, not Ishmael. This is one of the reasons why we know that he came from Sumer, because this practice was practiced by the Sumerians too. In fact, this same practice was also practiced by the Egyptians. The Egyptians did the same thing. They all had to interbreed and intermarry. This happened a lot. In fact, this is why many historians think that these kings were so freaking wacko half the time and prone to rage and aggression, because they were literally fucked up in the head from their genes and blood being mixed together. You know, some of them, we have accounts that they were born disfigured and terrible. You know, and why is that? Because now today we know that it's not good to have a kid with your sister. Sorry, bro, it's just not good. Maybe the Anunnaki, for example, maybe it was good for them to have a kid with their sister because they're not human beings like us. Maybe their genes were only able to interact with somebody who was slightly related to them. You know, similar to different blood types today, positive and negative blood types today. Maybe it was the same thing. You know, they had some sort of, because they're not the same as us. We might look similar to them. We might be the product of their creation, according to their books, quote unquote. But we're not the same as them, where they might be a different species where they have to have a child with somebody who's slightly related to them, because that's the only way that their physical genetics are able to procreate. Human beings are not like that. We know today through modern through modern science that you shouldn't be doing that, because it could lead to all sorts of problems and deformities and genetic abnormalities and all different things. Shouldn't be doing that. So they did it. So all these different things continue on in different cultures, and you're able to find the similar accounts all over. This is why the ancient alien theory is so prevalent. But we need to get our time frame right. We need to get our frame of reference right. For example, we are talking about right now the gods, trying to think of how to word this. You know, we're talking about how they came here hundreds of thousands of years ago, millions of years ago, lived here for millions of years without humans, then discovered that there were other hominids who grew. Now remember, we're talking about they came here for millions of years ago when the dinosaurs were still here. So they watched the first hominid creatures arise. They were studying these creatures. They knew that they existed. They knew that multiple of them existed. And this is proven by the various interpretations of the cuneiform text in Sumer, including Zechariah Sitchin's interpretation, because he says very simply, it's actually pretty easy what he says. The god Enki says, hey, in our study, I was over there, doing my nature thing, and which, remember, Enki is the god of nature, but he goes, I'm there doing my nature thing, like a good scientist that I am, and I discovered that there's these other hominids, and they're more smart than everybody else, than all these other hominids. What if we could use that? What if we could mess with that and, mess with their genes and make them smarter, yet not as smart as us? Or docile a little bit, so we could use them, and then we'll enslave them, and they'll say, oh, but you can't just enslave them. Yeah, but we'll trick them into thinking that we're gods, and whatever they're doing is worshiping us. So, it works out. It's fine. So, okay, that's cool. And they're like, all right, that works out. That's totally fine. But there's a problem with that, and the problem is they keep going, and these beings, they get their DNA implanted, mixed with the Anunnaki, ancient alien, whatever DNA, and from the DNA of the natural person on this planet, and a hominid, and the Anunnaki, a hominid and the Anunnaki creates the modern-day Homo sapien. Let's take a step back for a second. Let's imagine you're an extraterrestrial species. All of your planet is united under one rule, one government, one religion, whatever. You're a aggressive, warlike, multi-planetary conquering species. Well, same thing for human beings. If we go to another planet, like Mars, for example, you can't breathe. There's no air there. There's no edible food for you to eat. What do you got to do? Every time you're there, you got to wear the suit, these oxygen masks. No wonder these fucking Anunnaki people mining in the mines were pissed off. Not only did they have to live in these terrible below-surface conditions of the Earth, but then they had to do it while wearing oxygen masks and all of these things because they didn't breathe the same aerobic respiration as we do. They couldn't live on this planet. Well, what would you do if you were a scientifically advanced conquering species and you want to go out and conquer multiple different planets across the entire universe, or at least this one galaxy that you live in? What would you do? Well, you can't live on every planet. There's two options for you to do. You either terraform or change your genetics. Well, maybe they voted for changing the genetics. Maybe they did a mix of terraforming and changing the genetics. Maybe the dinosaurs dying out was on purpose. Who knows? But they changed the genetics. If you wanted to create a species that's part of your species that is natural to this planet, you're going to imprint your DNA on a species that already exists on this planet, that can already live on this planet. And eventually they will grow and evolve and become species of the planet. Your species will survive for centuries and generations on this planet and able to habitate the planet as if they were naturally born here on this planet, naturally created by the planet's natural evolution. Maybe that's what they did. And in fact, if you read a lot of the ancient accounts, including Zechariah Sitchin's Sumerian interpretation, and including some of the Jewish interpretations, which is, we've already established, pretty much the same, they had what was called birthing chambers and birthing women. They literally had the Anunnaki women. Some of them were artificially impregnated with altered genetics that would grow a baby that could be natural to this earth, the first human being. And they called it the Adamo, which today in the Bible we call Adam. It's the same thing. It's all written right there. But we just got to get our time frame right. We got to get our understanding of how it works right. 250,000-ish years ago, the first Homo sapiens were born, created from mixing another being there and the gods together, according to this interpretation at least. They said that we existed as an already naturally occurring being. I postulated that this naturally occurring being actually still exists today. Maybe only a few of them, but they still exist, or at least existed a few decades ago. The Bigfoot. Because if you read the stories of the natural being that Enki found in the Sumerian texts, that story reads a lot like a modern day reports of a Bigfoot encounter. 8 foot tall, hairy being, 2 arms, 2 legs, elusive. Maybe they're a natural hominid to the planet. Maybe they're one of our missing DNA ancestors. Who knows? Who knows at all? We don't know yet. Maybe we will know eventually. But these beings exist. I should say these beings existed already, naturally formed on the planet. And then there was an artificial mutation of genetics afterwards. This is why we have to realize that biblical accounts and everything, we have to remember that they're written in our modern times. They're really an amalgamation of stories that have coincided over time and then plotted together in their own story that forms whatever narrative that these people of the day wanted to form. That's all very well and good. The problem is it mixes the time frame and messes us up chronologically. For example, we talk about how the extraterrestrials came and messed with our DNA, but who said they only messed with our DNA once? And I said before that they messed with our DNA and created the first Homo sapiens 250,000 plus years ago by mixing their DNA with the God's DNA and blah, blah, blah. Could all be true. Could all very well be true. But then there's the story of them messing with our DNA again 50,000 years ago, which we're able to prove because of the combining of the 2 strands of DNA into 1 strand. The thing about that is that may or may not have been the only time that happened. But let's just roll with it. Let's just say it's just those 2 times. Why would they mess with us 50,000 years ago? Again. Well, there's the story of the Tower of Babel. Remember in the beginning, I said that the interpretation was that they wanted to create a being that would be servitude and docile and do whatever they say and worship them. Well, just like today with extraterrestrials, you're finding the story of the gods left and came back, and left and came back, and left and came back, and some of them stayed here, but they went back and forth between the home world and here. And these beings then would come here, and the human beings wanted to worship the gods. They wanted to be like the gods. We love the gods so much that we want to be just like you. We want to live like you. And you think that's crazy? Most of you worship modern day celebrities. Look at all of you worship Kim Kardashian, Taylor Swift. I mean, it's ridiculous. People worship Taylor Swift so much that during one of her European tours, seismologists were able to record the stomping of their feet from everybody dancing so much on a fucking seismograph miles away. That's significant. I mean, that literally being able to measure that is massive, and that's what happened. So the point is that so then these gods. Let me get back to the story. So these gods, they wanted to worship the gods, and they started building this giant tower and this thing called the Tower of Babel, and the gods saw this and said, "Oh my God. They're not docile. They're not worshiping us. They're trying to be like us. They're trying to be better than us. They're trying to take us over. We can't allow that. We got to do something about it." So they mess with their DNA again. And they disperse language among the people so that they can't communicate and be unified. What a poetic and beautiful fictionalized version of the story. Because some scientists today have stated that one possible combining of the genes might be what gives us language. Well, if it is what gives us language, and that happened about 50,000 years ago, and about 50,000 years ago the gods gave us language, well, isn't that like a poetic way to say that something happened with our genetics and they were combined into one strand, and that genetic strand allowed us to have language? Well, it's a poetic way of saying that we were not unified anymore because we had different languages and stuff. Well, yeah, you would have different languages. We have different languages today. You go to different parts of the world and people speak, different languages. They have different meanings for things, but it's all the same thing. A cup is still a cup. I just might call it something different because I'm from a different area than you. But if I point to it and say bleh, and it's a cup, you know that bleh means cup in my language. So it's still a cup. It's just something different. And to us. So before, maybe we didn't really speak, but we had grunts and points and actions and insinuations that we can make to unify the people and create a, incoherent sort of language, quote unquote, because it's not a language like we think today. And they would do something where they could, express their abstract thought to be able to work together. And then this gene combination happened somehow, and it gave us the ability to form full-on words and sentences and put things together in a chronological fashion. So then, because we were in different areas of the planet, we started to speak different languages because we weren't just grunting at each other anymore and pointing. We were speaking languages and full-on sentences and pointing, and translating different languages between each other. So whatever happened, whether it's really the gods or not, the aliens or not, who altered this DNA, whether it's nature or something, it's a very poetic and beautiful way to describe that before we weren't really good, we didn't really have language, and then something genetically happened, and somebody started falling full-on sentences. And they started making words and languages and stuff. It doesn't have to be gods and magic and all of that. It could just be pure science. It could just be pure natural selection. We don't know, but what we do know is that something happened in around this time frame of 50,000 plus or minus years ago, where all of a sudden we started to be able to have the ability to speak in a full language like we are today. Great way to talk about our different genetics and understanding. Now let's keep on going. For example, we hear that these stories of the gods coming here and going, coming and going, but then there's also the story of the gods living here. We have the story of Odin and Woden and Zeus and Jupiter and Kukulkan and Amaterasu and Shiva and all the other different gods all around the world coming here and then living here. This story is reflected amazingly in the Bible, incredibly in the Bible, as the fall of Lucifer, as the great battle in the sky between heaven and earth. And then later, the gods would return for a final time to do battle. Well, our modern day religious people think that this is all telling of a future story. I disagree completely. I think that all of these events, including the book of Revelation where the gods came down again and did a final battle, I think it all happened already. Tens of thousands of years ago. In fact, I think it all happened plus 50,000 years ago. I think that there was some sort of rebellion where the gods, some of the gods, wanted to be worshipped. In fact, I think it was the god that the Sumerians called Enki, who we today call Lucifer, is the same person. Because Lucifer was the firstborn. He was the brightest of the sons of God. Well, if God is Anu, the supreme god of the Anunnaki, and the firstborn is Enki, that could be Lucifer right then and there. And then we know that the secondborn is Michael the archangel, the protector, the battler, the unbelievable zealot worshiper of God. Well, that could be translated as Enlil, who did the same things in Anunnaki and Sumerian tradition. What you're talking about here is that there was a split. In fact, there was a split in court. See, the ancient Sumerian traditions are great because they also tell of the hierarchical, monarchical society of the Anunnaki. They tell of their, different kings and queens and wars that they fought amongst each other, and how there was battles and a council because the council was whatever, and there was a civil war. Because in this story, Enlil dies of old age. Well, if Enlil was the supreme god and he's the god, how can he die? He's God. Obviously, he's not God. It's just a different interpretation of what immortality means. For them, 50,000 years on Earth could be like 5 years on their planet. Who knows? It could be 10 years on their planet. Maybe 77 Earth years is is, 2 million years on their planet. Who knows? They still live for an average of 77 years. It's just that from our perspective, they live for hundreds of thousands of years, and that makes them quote-unquote immortal. So Anu dies, Enlil takes over. Why? Because he's the firstborn son of the correct lineage and the heir of being born of the king's half-sister. Well, people don't always like Anu, and this happens in many kingdoms in our own history. Look at the Middle Ages, look at the Renaissance period, look at all these time periods. The world, people didn't always agree with the next king and the next heir of the throne. We still don't today. People still do it today. They didn't agree, and so there was factions that split. Some people sided with Enki, some people sided with Enlil, or whatever their real frickin' names were. But some people sided with one or the other. And there was a battle done in the sky. And this is taken into account in many historical accounts. There's a battle who came in, and these beings battled each other, and they fought and took factions. This is written down in great detail in the Mahabharata in India. Huge, massive battles were written down and recorded on, all because these two gods, there was a split in faction. One of them wanted to be worshipped. One of them just wanted to be wanted to just do what they always did. Live here, watch from afar, not really interact. So there was a faction that took either sides, and they became two and fought. And guess what? At one point, Enki's faction won, and they lived here on Earth, and they were worshipped. And this is the time of when the gods lived on Earth, when Zeus lived on top of Mount Olympus, when the landing place in Baalbek in Lebanon existed as a place for these historical people to go to and try and go up to the land of the gods in heaven, because the landing place existed there, and this is where you could find the gods exist and find their where they are right now on this world. And you would go, and these beings would all look, and they would see that, the gods were really here on Earth. Just like how it says in the Bible that after the reckoning, the gods would be here on Earth, and Lucifer lived on Earth and ruled over the Earth for a period of a few thousand years. Well, what a great way to say that one of the alien factions beat the other alien faction and lived on this planet and forced us to worship them as gods. What a great way to say that. But that's probably more likely what happened than, some other shit that you're talking about. And so these beings literally fought and lived. And then there's the story of how we have in the Bible, we have the story of how the gods came back, and there was another war to fight against Lucifer and his armies, but this time waged on Earth. This is again written in Sumerian accounts and other ancient accounts and Hindu Sanskrit accounts. It's just written in so many different cultures. And guess what? These gods that won and took over were deposed. This is written down in Sumerian accounts of the Anunnaki and their struggles for their rulers and on their planet. Because there's a faction that splits and goes, and Enlil succeeds the throne, and then there's a battle fought over control of the earth, and Enki wins control of the earth. Enlil goes and rules over their planet with an iron fist. He's a ruthless dictatorial ruler according to the texts. And finally he musters up an army and goes and fights against Enki back on Earth. They conquer the world. They do all this. They conquer the Enki and his people. But remember, there's the Divine Council. After all of this, they realize that Enlil is a dictator and a genocidal maniac. And they literally depose him and send him off into exile. He's sent down, and where does he go? Who knows? He probably went to Earth. And Enki, in this story, is called back to live and rule over their planet, to take over as the rule, because even though he's not a full-blooded heir, he's the next in line to the throne because he's born of the original king. And in fact, maybe this is a change in their line of thinking. Maybe these species realize that maybe it's not so good to directly interbreed so much. You know, who knows? Maybe they finally figured it out and it took them longer than us and they thought that they were smarter than us. You know, so maybe that was the case. Who really knows? Maybe they just decided to go with a different line of heirs and successors. And maybe that's what happened. Maybe Enki is Zeus, but Lucifer is Enlil. Because in the Bible, Lucifer, after the fall and the wars, is then sentenced to walk among the earth for 1,000 years. He's sentenced to be imprisoned in a cage on the earth for 1,000 years and then to walk on the planet for all of eternity, for perpetually reincarnating and living on this planet forever. I don't know how you force somebody to perpetually reincarnate on a planet, but that's a different episode. We'll talk about that. I have an idea on how you would do that, but we'll get there. We're not even close to talking about that yet. So maybe the account of him just walking around is just an account of Enlil's exile, the king or god's exile, and forced whatever action they were forced on, which in this case the sentence was exile. So you have to and then maybe they all decided to take a totally different approach. Maybe they realized that Enki's version of direct worship wasn't right. Maybe they realized that direct intervention wasn't what they were going to do anymore. Maybe they realized that their mistake was revealing themselves as being extraterrestrial gods instead of being real divine lords in the imagination. Maybe they realized that their mistake was having the Watchers be beings like them. And in fact, if you read some of the accounts, they all decided to pull out of the planet. They decided to destroy their bases. They decided to destroy all evidence of their existence on the planet. They decided to destroy everything and leave. And instead of, they would create new Watchers, they say, and they would be purely controllable beings who would do nothing but do whatever they had to do for the benefit of the planet and for the benefit of their species, their descendants, the humans, who they genetically manipulated to be part of their species, to watch over them as the Watchers. What a great way to talk about robots. You say, oh, we created a bunch of robots to watch over them, and we programmed a directive into them, and a bunch of fail safes and control mechanisms where we could fully take over and even speak through them through a microphone or something. And we did all these things, and maybe that's what the Greys are. Maybe that's why people who say that they account with the Greys is they don't really eat, they don't do anything, they don't even have like organs or something, because they're probably freaking robots. And maybe that's exactly what they are. Maybe the gods realized that their direct intervention in life shouldn't be known, or whatever, they decided to not directly intervene anymore, and they created these watcher beings. The Greys, the whatever, all of this, the robots. They created these watcher beings to watch over their genetic species. Well, when did they do this? Probably about 15,000+ years ago, and after they were settled into creating their new plan, they sent the Great Flood to wipe away their evidence. They says, gee, how are we going to wipe away all this construction that we built, all of this, all of these massive structures that we built, all of these stoneworks, ancient mines that we quarried,